So, if a couple of months ago, somebody had come to me and said, you know what, I think that Thor Ragnarok is going to completely clobber the Justice League at the box office, I would have thought they were smoking something that's only legal in a couple of states, because let's be realistic about it. I am a Marvel fanboy. I'm not going to hide that. But I also know that Justice League is not only the DC equivalent of the Avengers, but has arguably the three most iconic characters in all of fiction, let alone the comic book world. When we're talking about Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who has not at least heard of all three of these characters. And as far as the supporting cast of the Flash, Cyborg, and anybody else that could be coming down the pike from the Justice League, a lot of people know who these characters are. So here we are, and its opening weekend domestically didn't even break $100 million. It was a huge disappointment. As far as its worldwide box office, it's sitting at under $300 million right now. It's probably, as far as the DC universe, going to end up being its lowest grossing film so far, unless something really unusual happens and it actually picks up steam as time goes on. So what the heck went wrong? Well, to be honest with you, I think that there is a fairly simple answer to what went wrong with the DCEU, and it's not the quality of the films. I do not think the DC films are necessarily bad movies, although I think Justice League is the weakest so far, mainly because of the rushed production, because of the change in director and an attempt to change the tone and everything of the film, and so the visual effects were incomplete. The story felt a little simplistic. The villain was rather pathetic. But that being said, this is not a review of Justice League. This is more or less my analysis of what's going on with the DCEU and what they have done wrong thus far. And I think, honestly, the simple fact is that DC has been unwilling to take its lumps. They've just wanted to make billion-dollar movies, and in doing so, they shot themselves in the foot. So let's get right into it with a tale of two universes. Before I get started, let me say something real quick. I do love doing these videos, but they do take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and I'd like to be able to do more of them. I'd like to be able to dedicate more time to it. If you like what I'm doing here, please take a moment, consider supporting me on Patreon. If you can't, hey, I get it. Don't stress over it or anything, but it would really help me out. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, all that good stuff, because if we can drive more traffic, that helps support the channel just doing that. So now let's get right into it. I know some people feel it's unfair to compare the DC Extended Universe with the Marvel Universe, mainly because, well, there have been 5 films in the DC Universe so far, one of which only opened a few days ago, whereas the Marvel Universe is now sitting on 17 completed films. But I actually think that is exactly why we should be looking at what's wrong here. Because, the problem is that it's not that DC can't make a good movie, and it's not even that they can't make a financially successful film. I mean, like I said, Marvel has had 17 films. If Batman v Superman was in fact a Marvel film, guess what? It would have been in 7th place, ahead of Guardians of the Galaxy, ahead of the Winter Soldier, ahead of Doctor Strange, ahead of Iron Man. All right, so it's not that DC can't make money on its movies. It's that DC was going for broke right out of the gate. And I think the easiest way to really show just how folly the DC universe structure has been is I wanted to go through the 5 movies that DC has, in fact, released and compare them to the 5 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that most closely represent them. And it really wasn't hard to find movies that closely represent each of the DC films. And I'm not saying DC has copied Marvel with all of their films. I'm simply saying, but when you're talking about a superhero based universe, and Marvel has made 17 films so far, you're gonna have some similarities here. Some of them, I will admit, are a little too similar for my taste, but that's a whole other issue. So right out of the gate, we have your universe introduction film. That has to be the first film in the franchise. It has to be a film that introduces a character that is going to be an iconic character throughout the franchise. And obviously that's easy. For the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that was Iron Man. For the DC Extended Universe, that, of course, is Man of Steel. And it's not without a certain sense of irony that I think about the fact that Iron Man and Man of Steel are virtually the same title. It's just that, if you switched one word, you could have Steel Man and Man of Iron. Well, anyway, that's just me being a nerd. But anyway, if we compare the numbers, Man of Steel actually made more money than Iron Man. Man of Steel made $668 million at the box office worldwide, while Iron Man made $585. Not a huge difference, mind you, but the DC Universe actually got off to a better start than the Marvel Universe as far as box office. Critically, however, not so much, because this is where DC has struggled from day one, is with the critics. They got a 55% on Rotten Tomatoes for Man of Steel, while Iron Man got a 94%. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that the reason for the critical response to the DC films is largely due to preconceptions. The simple fact is that nobody has not heard of Superman, and no film critic has never seen the Christopher Reeve Superman films, and therefore is going to say, this isn't Superman. This is an inconsistent character. He's dark. He's brooding. He's not the optimistic truth, justice, and the American way character that we've seen in film after film after film before. And yeah, that was kind of the point. I think Man of Steel was a great film. And apparently, so did a lot of the fans, because on the Rotten Tomatoes aggregate site, it also shows the fans gave it a 75%, as opposed to the 55% the critics gave it. Now, then we move on to Batman versus Superman, the second film in the DC franchise. And of course, again, it's not hard to come up with a comparison with Marvel. In this film, you have your two most iconic characters being turned against each other due to both internal and external forces. The external forces in each case is due to a villain who is attempting to manipulate them into destroying each other for his own nefarious plans. And, well, so we got Captain America Civil War. Now, Captain America Civil War, in my opinion, was clearly a better film than Batman v Superman, but they are pretty similar overall as far as what the films represent. And here it's kind of interesting, because if we just take these two films out of context with each other, they still did fairly comparably, only this time Marvel came out on top, where the Civil War made $1.1 billion at the box office. Batman v Superman made $873 million, so almost $900 million. Not a huge difference in box office between the two. They both had the same budget at $250 million. They both had generally positive fan reactions, but both of them also the same difference in critics. Critics loved Civil War, gave it a 91%. They hated Batman v Superman and gave it a 27%. And again, I think this is due to preconceived notions. This is not Batman. This is not Superman, because they were thinking of the Christopher Nolan Batman films, or even the Tim Burton Batman films. And of course, going back to the Christopher Reeve Superman. And so people were angry that their beloved characters were taking a different path. Meanwhile, the ironic thing is that in Civil War, a lot of people liked the darker, more serious tone of this film compared to other Marvel movies. And in fact, both of the Captain America sequels so far took that more serious tone, and a lot of people praised it for taking the characters in a different direction, while they absolutely skewered Batman v Superman for pretty much the same thing. Next up in the DC Cinematic Universe, we have Suicide Squad, about a team of anti-heroes that is not really directly related to the main team that we're building to, namely in the DC Universe, the Justice League. And they go off on their own adventure that, at least on the surface, seems to have nothing to do with the overall narrative. And here we have the Marvel equivalent will be Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, while Guardians of the Galaxy and Suicide Squad aren't exactly the same thing, the Guardians were not a bunch of prisoners that were given temporary pardon so they could go fight crime, although they were in prison at the beginning of the film and escaped and then went on their little adventure. They are outsiders. They are not directly related to the Avengers, just as Suicide Squad is not related to the Justice League. And again, similar box office numbers. Suicide Squad made $745 million at the box office, while Guardians of the Galaxy made $773. And again, similar differences in reaction. The critics loved Guardians of the Galaxy. They gave it a 91% for its different, unusual tone compared to the rest of the Marvel universe, that they went so much brighter and they went so much with so much more humor. And boy, that rock and roll soundtrack was awesome. While Suicide Squad got a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes, because how dare they try to take the serious universe of the DC universe and try to make it silly and jokey, and what's with this stupid rock and roll soundtrack? Again, you can see kind of a pattern here. People praising the Marvel films for the same thing that they skewer the DC films for. Next up, Wonder Woman. Now, Wonder Woman was not a hard one to come up with a Marvel analogy for, because, well, let's face it, Wonder Woman and Captain America, the First Avenger, are basically the same film. They both revolve around a super powerful figure who happens to dress in a variant of the United States colors and gets together a ragtag squad of commandos to take on the German threat from an offshoot German villain who also has superpowers because of a scientist that he has working for him, and has built a doomsday weapon to destroy the world that's loaded onto an airplane and eventually stopped by a guy named Steve. Now, I know some of those similarities are purely superficial, but they are very similar films. And nothing wrong with that. I think that both of them are very good films. I think that Wonder Woman is a little overrated, and I think Captain America is a little underrated. I'm not saying Wonder Woman sucked or that Captain America was the best film ever. I'm simply saying that I like them both a lot, and I think that Captain America could have deserved a little more praise, and Wonder Woman, quite frankly, got a little more than it deserved. But Wonder Woman on Rotten Tomatoes came in at 92% compared to Captain America's 80%. Wonder Woman destroys Captain America at the box office. Wonder Woman made $821 million at the box office. Captain America made $370 million, less than half of what Wonder Woman did. And they both had very similar budgets, $149 million to $140. Finally, we have Justice League and obviously the Avengers, the big team-up movie where we finally get to see the whole group put together in one movie, in one big action-packed package. And here, I mean, obviously Avengers beats it in pretty much every respect. Avengers is clearly a better film. However, you know, we also got to take into account Justice League has only been out for a week, so, you know, its box office will change. Avengers right now is at $1.5 billion at the box office, while Justice League is at $286 million worldwide. Which does not bode well for it to break any records, even just within the DC universe. It will probably end up being the lowest grossing DC film unless it has a lot more legs than any of its predecessor. The Avengers had a much lower budget, though, $220 million, which I know that sounds crazy to say a $220 million movie had a lower budget. But Justice League is currently sitting at least a $300 million budget, and it's probably substantially more than that. The only reason that $300 million is just what they've admitted to. Now, again, we have this crazy thing with the critics. The critics hated Justice League, gave it a 41%, and loved Avengers, 92%. Fans liked them both. Fans that have seen the movies on Justice League give it an 84, on Avengers give it a 91. So a little better for for Avengers there. But Justice League did not do badly there, but it is doing fairly poorly at the box office. So you might be saying, well, what the heck is your point to all this? You've just compared some numbers. Yes, and here's the problem. As I mentioned earlier, Captain America made less than half of what Wonder Woman did, and that's okay, because Captain America was part of Marvel building up their universe. And this is where DC completely screwed up here, is that if you look at the Marvel movies and you actually, and of course you can do this at boxofficemojo.com and other websites, you can sort them by their box office receipts. And guess what? The 3 lowest grossing films were the second, the third, and the fourth movie that Marvel put out. The Hulk, Captain America, the First Avenger, and Thor were their lowest grossing films. And that's perfectly acceptable and makes perfect sense, because while Iron Man was something new and different and it made a bunch of money, with Hulk, people were like, I don't know, we've seen Hulk before, hasn't been really that great. Captain America, oh, come on, how silly is that? And Thor, half the people haven't even heard of outside of Norse mythology. And however, in making those 3 movies, you built up an audience to where when the Avengers came out, it became one of the biggest box office successes of all time, and still sits at the biggest comic book adaptation of all time. The simple fact is that DC was not willing to go through their paces first. And so if we look at the analogous films that I listed out here, imagine what a different picture we'd be drawing if the Marvel Cinematic Universe started with Iron Man, then went straight into Civil War, then Guardians of the Galaxy, then Captain America, the First Avenger, and then the Avengers. So if we got to the Avengers, we never got a Hulk movie or a Thor movie. If we got to Civil War and we did not know who these people were, we only knew one character, it wouldn't have the dramatic feel that it did. It wouldn't have the impact that it did. And I think the Marvel universe would be completely falling apart at the seams, just like the DC universe is. The problem with DC is not that they make crappy movies. They make great movies. The problem is they're putting them out in the wrong order. Imagine for a moment if Man of Steel came out. Then we had a Batman movie, an Aquaman movie, a Wonder Woman movie, a Flash movie, and a Cyborg movie. Now, they put out these movies, and say they put out movies with between $150, $200 million budget, and like Marvel, they make between $300 and $500 million each, so they're just kind of breaking even. But then they launch the Justice League. Then they start putting out a couple of sequels, like Man of Steel 2, Batman 2. Then we get to Batman v Superman. Then Batman v Superman all of a sudden has a tone of characters we know and we care about. And imagine the difference that story could have made. Imagine what would happen if Batman had convinced other members of the League that Superman was dangerous and that he needed to be brought down. It just makes no sense that they rushed into it. And another problem with Batman v Superman, and this is another problem with DC's attitude on films, or Warner Brothers, I should say, their attitude on the films, is that they took the 2 most popular stories in all of the DC universe, namely Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, and The Death of Superman, and they crammed them into one story, and they crammed it in way too early. The Dark Knight Returns should be the end of the Batman saga. The Death of Superman, Doesn't have to be the end of Superman, but it needs to at least be several films in so that we've gotten to know Superman and the other characters, so that when there's mourning, when people are upset because Superman is dead, you feel like it. You feel like it's real. You don't feel like, oh, look, here's this guy, oh, he's dead. And so, all in all, please, if anybody from Warner Brothers sees this, you don't need to change the tone of your movies. If I wanted DC movies to be just like Marvel movies, well, I would just see Marvel movies. Imitating Marvel is not the answer to success as far as the tone and style of their movies, but pay attention to how they did their game plan. They played the long game. You're not. You're simply trying to throw out what's going to be box office gold. And you were technically more successful. If you compare your first 5 films to the first 5 films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, well, let's say the first 4 films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you're way out in front. Because your second movie made $873 million. The Incredible Hulk made $263 million. Your third movie made $745. Captain America made $370. And your third film made $821 million in there, and Thor made $449. But you weren't building towards anything. You were just throwing out your aces right off the bat. So if you reboot, if Flashpoint becomes a reboot of the universe, that's fine. Just don't try to make it not just an imitation of Marvel. Just do it right this time. Don't rush it. All right, that's my rant for today. You guys have a good one. The preceding documentary was created for the express purpose of criticism, commentary, and education, and is therefore protected under the Copyright Act of 1976, Section 107, which reads in part, the fair use of a copyrighted work, including such use by reproduction in copies or phonorecords, or by any other means specified by that section, for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research, is not an infringement of copyright.